Došu vārdu autoram David Lega kungam 2 minūtēm.
Thank you, Mr. President. This topic is very serious. The Taliban have banned girls from returning to secondary schools and universities, depriving an entire generation of proper education. Today we are pointing out the Taliban's unkept promise that girls' and women's access to education would be restored. Afghanistan is now the only country in the world which refuses to allow women and girls to be educated beyond primary level. And this recent decision reflects the Taliban's goal to have women and girls locked up in their homes. This medieval attitude deserves our strongest condemnations and firm action of the EU. The Taliban's systematic violation of the rights of women and girls since 2021 may even amount to crimes against humanity, according to the UN. Therefore, we call on the EU to hold the perpetrators of these grave violations accountable, including by sanctions. And at the same time, we ask the EU and the member states to increase support to Afghanistan. Where was I? There, sorry. To increase support to Afghan groups providing education to women and girls, and the EU should support alternative education options, both online and via community education. Young girls belong in schools on equal footing with boys. Girls' rights are human rights. Thank you.
Paldies. Nākamajam autoram ir Karina Olson kundzei 2 minūtēm.
Herr talman, fru kommissionär, tack för ordet. Afghanistan är idag världens värsta land för kvinnor och flickor att leva i. Vi bevittnar nu hur kvinnors och flickors rättigheter fortsätter att inskränkas. Vi vet att detta är en medveten strategi från talibanerna för att radera kvinnor från det offentliga rummet. Sedan talibanerna tog över makten hösten 2021 är bakslagen för jämställdheten ett faktum, och det får enorma konsekvenser. Att förbjuda utbildning för kvinnor och flickor kommer inte bara påverka alla barns utveckling, utan det kommer allvarligt hämma kvinnors möjligheter till ett ekonomiskt oberoende och självständigt liv. Utbildning är inte bara en rättighet i sig själv, utan det är en väg till ett arbete, till en rimlig levnadsstandard och att kunna delta i samhället. När talibanerna nu förbjudit utbildning för kvinnor och flickor över 12 år får det också andra förödande konsekvenser. Tvångsäktenskap blir fler, det könsbaserade och sexuella våldet ökar och prostitutionen växer. I denna djupt oroväckande utveckling finns det civila organisationer och individer som gör heroiska insatser för att främja mänskliga rättigheter och allas lika värde. Detta trots att det riskerar sin egen säkerhet och sina egna liv. En av dem är Matiullah Wesa, en 30-årig aktivist som sedan 2009 drivit organisationen Pen Path. Organisationen jobbar med att säkerställa utbildning till unga tjejer. Därför är det djupt beklagligt och helt oacceptabelt att de talibanska säkerhetsstyrkor grep honom i Kabul 27 mars. Idag har varken vi eller hans familj någon information om var han är eller hur han mår. Den talibanska regimen bör omedelbart släppa honom och andra aktivister som blivit gripna för sitt kampanjande för flickor och kvinnors rätt till utbildning. Och detta måste också kommissionen och EAS öka sitt stöd till de organisationer som trots läget hittar lösningar för att flickor och kvinnor ska få utbilda sig i Afghanistan. Europa får inte svika alla dessa unga tjejer och kvinnor som drömmer om en bättre värld och ett bättre liv, både för sig själva och för sina familjer. Tack för ordet.
Paldies. Nākamajam vārds Petras Austravičus kungam arī autoram 1 minūtē.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues, the return of the Taliban has plunged Afghanistan into the dark ages. At least half of the Afghan society, Afghan girls and women, have been deprived of basic rights and freedoms. They have been excluded from public life, confined within the four walls of their homes, which are tantamount to prison. By denying girls and women an education and replacing modern secular education with religious training for boys, the Taliban are depriving Afghanistan of its future. I call on the European Union to continuously raise the issue of education of Afghan girls and women in all international fora. I also call on joint action with Islamic countries to hold the Taliban accountable and to lift bans that violate the rights of Afghans and are incompatible with Islam. The future of Afghanistan is shaped by people who value education and are not afraid of women's emancipation, such as Matiullah Wesa, Rasul Abdi Parsi, Noroyel Kalival, and Mortaza Behuri. Thank you.
Paldies. Nākamajai vārds autorei 2 minūtēm Hanna Neumann kundzei. Lūdzu.
Dear colleagues, the Taliban have started a new attack against women and against education. Only 1.5 years after they took power, women are banned from public life. No education, no parks, no work. And their latest cynical decree, women are no longer allowed to work for the UN. Today's Taliban are willing to sacrifice the lives of more than 1 million Afghans threatened by starvation only for their gender apartheid ideology. And they attack the future of their country, the education of its youngest. The Taliban self-proclaimed Minister of Education announced to prepare a new jihadi, yes, that's the word he used, jihadi curriculum. Private schools are forced to close by now in at least 2 districts, and madrasas are being built across the country, providing the only means of education for many boys. At the same time, those advocating for education in line with Afghan tradition, in line with Islamic teaching, are put behind bars like Matiullah Wesa from Penpath. He spent more than 14 years of his life traveling throughout Afghanistan, finding local solutions for local problems, working with tribal leaders to open schools in rural areas. This guy is a national Afghan hero. Let's face the terrible truth. The Taliban are holding women captive in their homes, and they want to raise a new generation of jihadi fighters. And I know there is no easy answer, no easy solution for this. But this is precisely why we can't turn our backs. This is precisely why we have to watch carefully what is happening in the country, why we shouldn't even think about recognizing the Taliban, and why we should all jointly demand the release of Matiullah Wesa and all those unjustly held in Taliban prisons.
Paldies. Nākamajam autoram Ryszardam Czarnecki vārds 1 minūtē.
Paldies, panie przewodniczący, przedstawiciele Komisji Europejskiej, szanowni państwo. A po tym niestety przeprowadzonym w chaosie wycofaniu Amerykanów we wrześniu 2021 roku ostrzegałem, że nie mają racji ci, którzy mówili nam, że te nowe władze to już inni talibowie, że już nie są tacy radykalni, że są otwarci na dialog, że są wykształceni na zachodnich uniwersytetach i że to już jest lepsza twarz talibów niż ci, którzy rządzili w Kabulu przed 20 laty. No, przestrzegałem, że tak naprawdę to taktyka, że talibowie są tacy sami. I to się potwierdza. Potwierdziło się to, co się stało 3 tygodnie temu, to aresztowanie, o którym tu mowa. Wydaje mi się, że trzeba bardzo twardo egzekwować wszelkie sankcje wobec Afganistanu, bo tylko to może skłonić rząd Kabulu do tego, aby ten kraj starał się przynajmniej zachować pewne minimalne standardy, choć tutaj jestem jednak pesymistą.
Paldies. Nākamajai autorei vārds Marisa Matias kundzei, 1,5 minūtē.
Muito obrigada, Presidente. O direito à educação continua a ser negado às mulheres e raparigas no Afeganistão. Matiullah Wesa, um prominente defensor da educação feminina e fundador da PEN Path, foi detido arbitrariamente, como tantas outras que já foram antes, nomeadamente ativistas e manifestantes pelos direitos das mulheres. Condenamos veementemente o retrocesso devastador dos direitos das mulheres e a situação mais ampla dos direitos humanos no Afeganistão e temos uma enorme preocupação com a crise humanitária que se vive, que afeta mais as mulheres, as meninas e as famílias chefiadas por mulheres. Mas não nos iludamos. No Afeganistão há um legado desastroso, de décadas de intervenção internacional, de ocupações ilegais, como foi a da NATO. E também devemos fazer uma reflexão sobre isso. É por isso que a União Europeia deve aumentar a sua contribuição para a ajuda humanitária ao Afeganistão e facilitar a reinstalação segura de afegãos em risco, nomeadamente através do aumento da concessão de vistos humanitários, dando prioridade às mulheres e raparigas. É também com grande preocupação que ouvimos as declarações da Secretária-Geral Adjunta das Nações Unidas, Amina Mohamed, de que a ONU está a preparar um roteiro para o reconhecimento oficial dos talibãs. Mas, colegas, não esqueçamos o legado desastroso do que foram as décadas de intervenção internacional, das ocupações ilegais. Não apaguemos o que foi a ocupação ilegal da NATO. Obrigada.
Paldies. Vārds Eiropas Tautas partijas grupas vārdā Sean Kelly kungam 1 minūtē.
As the situation in Afghanistan worsens, I am gravely concerned for the safety and well-being of Afghan citizens, particularly women and girls, members of the LGBTQI community and ethnic minorities. We have witnessed the Taliban taking away women's freedom of movement, their right to work and their right to education. We have reached crisis point and it is time for the EU to take swift action. One avenue in which the EU can provide tangible support to Afghan women is through academic networks. Keeping Afghan women in education would be crucial for the future of Afghanistan. Afghanistan will need educated women in rebuilding itself in the wake of the Taliban, and the EU has the potential to contribute towards this. I am therefore calling for the European Commission and Member States to facilitate scholarships exclusively for Afghan women and girls. By bringing women back into education, we are not saving them from Afghanistan, but saving them for the future of Afghanistan.
Paldies. Nākamā vārds sociāldemokrāta grupas vārdā Dietmar Koster kungam 1 minūtē.
576 days since the Taliban banned teenage girls from education. Half of Afghanistan's population is denied the right to education and work. Last month, the arbitrary arrest of Matiullah Wesa is a severe blow to the already dire situation. Yet girls' education is a central key to a country's sustainable, social, democratic, and economic development. In 2001, almost 0 girls attended secondary education in Afghanistan, compared with 1.1 million in 2021. And what is happening now? 0 girls again. Given the current situation under the Taliban, this can only mean one thing. Afghan women must be recognized as refugees under the Geneva Refugee Convention, as the European Union Agency for Asylum has advised.
Paldies. Nākamai Renew Europe grupas vārds ir Salima Yenbu kundzei 1 minūtē.
Madame la Commissaire, chers collègues, 24 jours que Matiullah Wesa a été arrêté arbitrairement par les talibans. Quel crime odieux a-t-il pu commettre? Il a traversé l'Afghanistan rural avec un mégaphone sur sa bibliothèque mobile, plaidant pour le droit à l'éducation des femmes et des filles afghanes. L'Afghanistan est le seul pays au monde interdisant aux filles et aux femmes d'aller à l'école au-delà du primaire, les rendant invisibles dans l'espace public. Matiullah Wesa leur a apporté l'école, le savoir, l'ouverture au monde et l'esprit critique. Nous connaissons les méthodes des talibans. En jetant en prison Matiullah Wesa, les défenseurs des droits humains et les journalistes, c'est l'avenir de toutes les filles et garçons afghans et les voix dissonantes qui sont jetées aux oubliettes. Il est de notre devoir d'assurer leur libération et ainsi libérer le droit inaliénable à l'éducation et à la liberté des filles et des femmes afghanes. En écho à leurs sœurs iraniennes, les Afghanes scandent leur femme, vie, liberté en dari, Zan, Zendegi, Azadi. Merci.
Paldies. Zaļo grupas vārdā vārds Tineke Strika kundzei 1 minūtē.
Chair, Commissioner. The detention of education activist Matiullah Wesa is yet another display of the crackdown on all freedoms in Afghanistan under the Taliban rule. Especially for women and girls, the country has turned into a real nightmare. Banned from education, banned from the labor market, and de facto erased from public life. While this should ring all our alarm bells, the EU's support and commitment is still falling short. Afghan human rights defenders can't leave the country because member states refuse to issue visa. Asylum claims are rejected and leaving people in Europe in limbo. Well, they can't go back, of course. And in so many other areas, we could and should do so much more. Last week, UN Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan reminded us of the banner we have attached on our building, saying that the support of Ukrainians will take as long as needed, and rightfully so. But why not make the same commitment to Afghans? The Afghans need our concrete support. Let us not forget them. Thank you.
Paldies. Nākamai ID grupas vārdā vārds Patricija Šanjo kundzei 1,5 minūte.
Soyons clairs. Lorsqu'on parle de l'Afghanistan, on parle d'un régime obscurantiste. Nul n'ignore que l'Afghanistan est un émirat islamiste sous le joug de talibans qui imposent la charia, la loi islamique. Les talibans sont des islamistes moyenâgeux qui soutiennent des dogmes religieux venus de notre temps. Cet islam archaïque et rétrograde est incompatible avec la liberté d'éducation et de formation, car il dénie à plus de 50% de la population, c'est-à-dire aux femmes, le droit de vivre. Si notre Parlement veut sincèrement débattre des droits dans ce pays, il doit en préambule constater que le régime politique et religieux afghan ne peut ni ne veut garantir l'accès des femmes à l'éducation et au savoir. En Afghanistan, 30% seulement des femmes adultes savent lire en 2022. C'est 2 fois moins que les hommes. Pire, les tribunaux islamiques prononcent des châtiments corporels et peuvent aller jusqu'à la lapidation des femmes accusées d'adultère. Les filles prépubères y sont mariées de force. Pourquoi le Parlement se focalise sur la situation des défenseurs de droits humains dans ce pays, qui n'est qu'à la pointe émergée d'un iceberg gigantesque, celui d'une idéologie barbare à l'opposé de tout humanisme? Je refuse pour ma part de regretter des inégalités d'accès à l'éducation ou autres dans ce pays sans dénoncer avant tout l'idéologie islamiste. Merci.
Paldies. Nākamajā vārds Mihaela Šoidrovā kundzei 1 minūtē.
Dear colleagues, dear Ms. Commissioner, it has been only 5 months since our last debate on Afghanistan. Sadly, we must address this issue again since women's persecution continues. It is a shame that women in Afghanistan cannot basically travel without a male companion, but they are also denied the fundamental right to education beyond the primary level. I invite you to look into the painful testimonies of young Afghan girls who, by their own words, feel broken and in pain by these unjust restrictions. The recent arrest of Matiullah Wesa is just the tip of the iceberg. We call on Afghanistan's authorities to immediately and unconditionally release her and others imprisoned for exercising their fundamental rights. We urge the same authorities to fulfill their pledge and restore girls' access to education Moreover, we must maintain a strict conditional engagement with the Taliban and comply with the benchmark set by our Council, because women's rights are human rights. Thank you.
Paldies. Nākamā vārds Lukaš Kohut kungam 1 minūtei.
Często jest tak, że ci, którzy Boga mają na ustach, tak naprawdę diabła mają w sercu. Tacy właśnie mężczyźni urządzili piekło na ziemi dla swoich kobiet. Urządzili Afganistan. Bo to właśnie na przykładzie tego kraju najlepiej widać, jak się kończy sojusz tronu z ołtarzem. Pozbawienie dostępu do oświaty, szerzenie ciemnoty i prześladowanie aktywistów na rzecz edukacji. To także na przykładzie tego kraju widać, jak wygląda ostatnie stadium arbitralnego decydowania o losie kobiet. Ograniczenie dostępu do środków antykoncepcyjnych, zabieranie możliwości zatrudnienia, przymusowe małżeństwa. Na tej ziemi przegrywasz na starcie, rodząc się kobietą. Z tego miejsca chciałbym wyrazić głęboki szacunek i solidarność dla prześladowanych Afganek. Wierzę, że nadejdzie moment, w którym wyzwolą się z tego koszmaru. Państwo musi być świeckie. Świeckie państwo nie jest wrogiem religii, ale sojusz władzy z ołtarzem jest zawsze wrogiem wolności. Dziękuję bardzo.
Paldies. Nākamais vārds Samīra Rafaela kundzei 1 minūtei.
So here we are again to discuss the horrible situation of women and girls in Afghanistan. And it's endless. And what the Taliban has done is introducing gender apartheid. That's what it is. And under this regime, women and girls will never be safe and secure. And we can absolutely not allow, the international community cannot allow to recognize the Taliban and its regime, because we cannot bow down for this kind of regimes. Women and girls in Afghanistan are not safe to follow education. And what can we do about that? I've seen Denmark and Sweden already introducing good examples to introduce special humanitarian visas for women and girls. And this is exactly what the European Union and all the member states need to do directly to make sure that these women and girls can work and build on their future, that they can educate themselves, that they can educate the next generation, and that we can protect the fundamental rights. We should not abandon them, and I'm asking the European Commission urgently to see what you can do about introducing the special humanitarian visas for women and girls as quick as possible. Thank you.
Paldies. Nākamais vārds Isabella Tovaglieri kundze 1 minūte.
Con i talebani al potere le condizioni femminili in Afghanistan sono tornate indietro di 20 anni. Nel nome di un'interpretazione arcaica ed estremista della Sharia, alle donne è stato imposto il velo integrale ed è stato vietato non solo di lavorare ma anche di studiare. Quasi tutte le scuole femminili infatti sono state chiuse e chi studia o insegna di nascosto lo fa a rischio della propria vita. Il recente arresto di Matiullah Wesa, colpevole di aver promosso la scolarizzazione delle bambine e delle adolescenti, infrange le ultime speranze di un'intera generazione di donne a cui vengono rubati non solo i diritti ma anche il futuro. Se vogliamo essere davvero coerenti nel condannare il regime talebano, ribadiamo la necessità che i diritti negati in Afghanistan siano sempre garantiti nella nostra civile Europa, dove purtroppo molte giovani immigrate o figlie di immigrati spesso vengono avviate a matrimoni precoci invece che agli studi superiori, con la complicità miope delle sinistre che promuovono il velo islamico anziché i nostri valori occidentali di uguaglianza e di libertà.
Paldies. Es neredzu telpā nākamo runātāju Helēnu Fritsonu, un tāpēc došu vārdu Ivan David kungam 1 minūtei.
Vážený pane předsedající, ženy v Afghánistánu nemají možnost se zúčastnit společenského života a dosáhnout vyššího vzdělání. Zítra budeme hlasovat o protestním usnesení. Zástupce velvyslance Spojených států v OSN Robert Wood nedávno řekl: Tálibán nemůže očekávat, že se stane legitimním členem mezinárodní komunity, aniž by respektoval práva všech lidí v Afghánistánu, obzvlášť lidská práva a základní svobody žen a dívek. Byly to ale Spojené státy, které přivedly muslimské fanatiky k moci, když dodávali Talibánu zbraně, aby Afghánistán ovládl. S pomocí USA tak Talibán zavedl veřejné popravy, bičování, kamenování. Armáda USA byla nedávno z Afghánistánu vyhnána. Ani vlády v Evropě nedokáží zajistit lidská práva ženám v no-go muslimských komunitách, kde se praktikuje právo šaria. Můžeme si tedy odhlasovat cokoliv, ale nenapravíme tyto důsledky špatné politiky USA a Evropské unie. Děkuji za pozornost.
Okay. Paldies. Nākamajai vārds Alessandra Moretti, kundzei vienai minūtei.
È un tracollo tragico quello a cui assistiamo in Afghanistan riguardo i diritti delle donne. In poco più di un anno le donne afghane sono state licenziate dai loro impieghi, radiate dai ruoli amministrativi, è stato vietato loro di fare sport, comprare contraccettivi, sono state allontanate dalle scuole superiori e dalle università, impedendo loro di costruirsi un futuro dignitoso. Vietare alle ragazze l'accesso all'istruzione è una violazione dei diritti umani. Significa negare ogni speranza a milioni di giovani, ma non solo. Queste norme criminali mettono in pericolo la stessa vita delle donne. Basti pensare alla loro salute. Le afghane non possono essere visitate dai medici uomini, ma se alle donne non è consentito studiare medicina, a chi possono rivolgersi? Chiedo alla Commissione europea di sostenere le organizzazioni che con grandissimi sforzi cercano di offrire servizi alternativi per l'istruzione delle giovani afghane. Invito inoltre tutte le istituzioni europee e gli Stati membri ad esercitare pressioni sui talebani affinché rispettino i diritti umani. La cultura, la conoscenza, le competenze sono gli unici strumenti che possono permettere al popolo afghano di risollevarsi dalla crisi economica, ambientale, dall'emergenza alimentare che tengono in ostaggio il Paese e il contributo delle donne, anche in questo caso, è fondamentale. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Mr. Lucke. The floor is yours.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Was kann der Beweggrund sein eines Regimes, Mädchen und Frauen des eigenen Landes Zugang zu Bildung verwehren? Was ist es, das die Machthaber in Afghanistan antreibt, sich derartig menschenunwürdig zu verhalten? Ein völlig aus der Zeit gefallenes Geschlechterverständnis, die Angst, die eigene Machtposition zu verlieren, mangelndes Selbstbewusstsein, irgendwas muss kompensiert werden. Ich weiß es nicht, ich kann es ahnen, letztendlich sind die Beweggründe unerheblich. Dass Mädchen und Frauen letztlich das Recht haben müssen, sich frei zu entfalten, das ist wichtig. Durch Bildung wachsen wir und wir gedeihen, wir entwickeln uns und wir machen Dinge möglich, die in uns schlummern und die durch Bildung gefördert und zur Entfaltung gebracht werden. Keine Bildung ist kein physischer Schmerz, aber keine Bildung ist auch ein Vergehen an der gesamtheitlichen Entwicklung eines jeden Menschen. Und dass Mädchen und Frauen das verwehrt wird, das macht wütend und traurig gleichermaßen. Ich hoffe auch kurzfristig, dass wir wirklich Wege finden und verstärkt Alternativen, die wir jetzt auch anwenden können, um informelle Bildung zu unterstützen und dass der Druck auf die afghanische Regierung hochgehalten werden muss. Denn die Hoffnungsträger sind die mutigen Frauen und Männer und die Vertreter wie Wesa, die jetzt aus dem Gefängnis entlassen werden müssen. Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. I have just two speakers for the KHDI. I will give the floor now to Mr. Wallace. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President. The US and NATO destroyed Afghanistan for 20 years, the end result being the return of the brutal Taliban. And according to the UN, almost 23 million facing life-threatening food insecurity and 9 million close to famine. While the US was ending its destructive war in Afghanistan, politicians and the media were overflowing with concern for the Afghan people. Now that US sanctions are adding to the mass suffering and death in the country, they've lost interest. It was only a few months ago that the press and wider political establishment took part in one of the most brazen pro-war campaigns in recent memory to undermine and reverse a US withdrawal from the horrific war there. That push, we were told at the time, was because of political and media figures' intense, overwhelming love and concern for the Afghan people, particularly the women and girls, relentlessly cited by people whose hearts suspiciously only started bleeding once there was a prospect of Western bombs and bullets no longer killing them. The hypocrisy in this place is too bad.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mrs. Daly. The floor is yours.
Thanks, President. In many countries, women and girls are denied an education, but only in Afghanistan is this gender apartheid a deliberate policy implemented by the state in violation of international law, Islam and all morality. It is, of course, an abomination that educators are arrested and those seeking an education hunted down, and we condemn it utterly. But can we get real here? These issues didn't drop from the sky. In the 60s and 70s, before the Soviet invasion and the subsequent Western creation and support for the Mujahideen, women and girls were equal and educated. We can't ignore the decades of external interference which has got Afghanistan to this place. It's 2 years since the US withdrawal, almost, and the Taliban taking over all of the country. The strategy of ignoring them isn't working. There's a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic proportions. The economy is barely functioning. People are surviving on remittances. Millions are stranded in Iran and Pakistan, and our borders are closed to them. This in a country where 300 million a day was spent for 20 years on war. That's the origin of the present nightmare, and we've a responsibility to fix it.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to the Commission, Commissioner Kyriakides. The floor is yours.
Madam President, honourable members of the European Parliament, since the Taliban forcefully took power in Afghanistan, they have structurally and systematically violated economic, social and cultural, political and civil rights of the people of Afghanistan, especially of women and girls. Afghanistan is the only country in the world that prohibits education beyond primary level for girls. The Taliban's decisions of denying girls access to secondary and higher education are blatant violations of the fundamental right to education based on equal opportunity and enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and several international human rights treaties to which Afghanistan is a state party. No religious or social reason could ever justify such unequal treatment. At a time when Afghanistan is facing one of the worst economic and humanitarian crises in the world, the Afghan people's predicament is steadily made worse by the Taliban, who deprive women and girls from their right to education, work, and other opportunities to contribute to socio-economic life. The UN estimates that since March 2022, 1.1 million girls have been deprived of secondary education, as their schooling was banned. Almost 4 million children are out of school in Afghanistan, 60% of them girls. In certain provinces, it is reported that the official curriculum is being replaced by religious education in madrasas, and that forced marriages of girls have increased significantly. Activists who are advocating for girls' and boys' education are being threatened, arrested, tortured, and many are being pushed to exile. The European Union's position is very clear. We remain committed to providing support for the Afghan people, as long as this can be continued in line with the EU's principled approach, particularly the rights of women and girls. The EU will continue to call for and exert pressure to ensure that all Afghan children, girls and boys alike, have the chance to learn. We will also continue to support Afghan human rights activists and civil society, as we do worldwide, reflecting a fundamental principle of the EU. This support increases raising individual cases of human rights defenders in our engagement with the de facto authorities and continuation of safe passage operations for those Afghans particularly at risk. Matiullah Wesa is the head of PenPath, a civil society organization in Afghanistan campaigning for the reopening of girls' schools. He was detained on 27th March when leaving a mosque in Kabul by a group of armed men who claimed to represent the General Directorate of Intelligence of the Taliban. His arrest was confirmed by the Taliban representatives on 29th March. The EU delegation in Kabul has been in close contact with Matiullah Wesa over the past months. He had visited Brussels in December last year. Education activist Matiullah Wesa remains in custody, among other Afghan human rights defenders. And you can rest assured that we are following and we will be continuing to follow his case very closely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. I